Hey guys, welcome back for video 3 of chapter 11, dealing with the Great Depression. So, have a special guest here, my dog Zoe. Zoe! All the other special guests that I have requested have not gotten back to me, so figured bringing my dog into this one. And because I have my dog, I figured I'd try to make a dog joke, and I really couldn't think of any good ones. And I was going to make a joke about pizza, but I figured, nah, it would be way too cheesy. So as always, you get the joke without me even setting it up. But take a couple minutes, laugh it up. But now we get back to U.S. history. So today's focus is going to be on President Hoover and what his response is going to be with the Great Depression. So I guess first things first, as we've talked about and discussed before, we always blame the president when something negative happens. And the Great Depression is not going to be any different whatsoever. So being the commander-in-chief, being the chief executive, the president, he has a tough job. And especially he has a tough job when we're right in the middle of the Great Depression. And having it happen under his watch, well, he has a tough job of figuring out what he can really do in order to fix the economy and to make sure that his political party is going to be saved. So the first couple things that he's going to try to do is something known as voluntary efforts and public works. So as far as voluntary efforts, what that means is after the Great Depression started, and we talked about the multiple reasons as to why it began with talking about the stock market and credit and Smoot-Hawley tariff and all those great things that just kind of came into one and exploded, and now we have the Great Depression. So President Hoover, he is soon going to call a meeting for all the heads of the major businesses. So everyone who is in charge of, say, the railroads or factories or car production, he's going to bring all of them together to have a special meeting. And really what the goal of this meeting, they are going to try to form a pact, form an agreement that they are going to, first of all, quit cutting wages, so people are still going to make the same amount of money, and second of all, that they are not going to shut down their factories. So we have kind of two promises put into place, and everyone that is there is on board. Everyone that is there says, yes, this is a great idea. It's going to help out the economy. And really, President Hoover, he was trying to be optimistic. He told the American public that this was going to be over within 60 days, that America's economy is strong enough to suffer something like the stock market crash and still thrive. But when he does this voluntary meeting, people realize that he hasn't really been truthful. If he's calling these people here, that something is probably wrong. So all these people agree to it, and they leave and do the exact opposite. It almost look like, hey, we can use this to our advantage. So his aspect of voluntary efforts is seen as a failure. The second thing that he does is something known as public works. And what a public work project is that would be creating roads, hospitals, schools, the Hoover Dam, for example, would be one. Anything that is going to supply jobs. Now, really, this is something that is done by the government. It helps out the government in all actuality because really now they have some form of infrastructure, schooling or hospital or something like that built. So his plan, public works projects. And the good thing about this is the government is hiring individuals to do this, so people are getting jobs, but on the other side, well, it only takes so long to build a road or so long to build a hospital. So it does create a small fraction of the jobs, but it doesn't create enough, and there's still going to be millions and millions of people who are going to be unemployed. And a lot of economists look at Herbert Hoover and think that, hey, we need to increase spending in order to do this. And then once we increase our spending, that's when this public works is going to go off. But he does not believe in that. He does not want to increase public spending. And the reason he doesn't want to do that is companies are broke, people are broke, the government is broke as well. So because of that, in order to raise money, he would have had to raise taxes. So it's almost kind of like, are we going to hire people and then take more tax money away from them? He kind of looks at that as almost like a double negative. So he doesn't agree with raising taxes right away. But those are going to be the first two things that he's going to try to do. Now, the second thing he tries to do is he wants to rescue the banks. Now, the banks that were failing at this time, they weren't having enough money in circulation. They were giving out risky loans, and he thinks that he needs to help out the banks in order to help out the economy. So the president, the first thing he tries to do with the banks is he goes to the Federal Reserve, and asks them to put more money into circulation. Now, they refuse. They are not on the same page as him. They think that this is an absolutely atrocious idea. And in a way, they kind of have a point, because let's look at Germany at this time period with the Weimar Republic. They printed out tons and tons of money. And what happens? Hyperinflation. So he wants to put more currency into circulation, but they are going to refuse. So he has to look past that. Now he goes to what's known as the National Credit Corporation. Now this is going to be a new industry, a new government program that is set up by Hoover. And what this does, it's set up to keep banks from handing out loans. And that's a good thing. We need to have banks. We need to have loans. Companies, more than likely, they need some loan in order to expand, in order to have factories expanding and businesses going from, all the way across the continent and helping out the country. But the hard part about this National Credit Corporation is they don't think that they should be giving out money to a lot of these banks. So they help out kind of the ones that are successful, but the ones that are failing, kind of the small market ones, the one in kind of some rural communities, they're going to be the ones that need the most money, and it fails to meet the nation's need. Now, after the creation of the National Credit Corporation, Hoover next looks at direct relief. Now, President Hoover, he was against giving relief to the people. And what that means is he's okay with having these public works jobs, but he didn't think that he and the federal government should be giving out money to citizens. And just like, okay, you're unemployed, here's $100 and stuff like that. So a lot of politicians that are pushing for it, they wanted people to give that relief. But really, he thought that this should be at the state level. He thought if it was at the federal level, it would kind of be corrupt. So in 1932, eventually, they are able to figure out how to give some of this relief. So Congress passes the Emergency Relief and Construction Act. And again, what it does is it gives money to the states. And, not just a small amount of cash. It gives $1.5 billion. I mean, think about what $1.5 billion can give, especially in 1932. But it's almost like at this point, too little, too late. And it was a lot of money, but when you have to spread that out to all the states, the entire country, it's just not going to be enough to be able to get enough support. And a couple of other negatives that also happened under his watch is something known as the bonus and hunger marches. So first we'll talk about the bonus march and what this is, and really why it hurts Hoover as a president, and ultimately this is one of the reasons he's not going to be reelected. So the bonus march, what this was is after World War I, Congress had enacted this. They gave out a bonus. So they gave out $1,000 to each veteran, and each of these veterans was supposed to get this $1,000 cash in 1945. And I know a lot of people are kind of scratching their head, thinking, World War I ended in 1919. A few years later, they passed this law. Why in 1945? Why such a long time before they are going to be able to be given this bonus? And really, there's not a lot known as to why, but they do know that 1945 is the year that this bonus is supposed to be given out. So a lot of people who are veterans that are broke, they're homeless, they believe that they should be given the money early. So in 1931, marches began, and they were heading to Washington, D.C. And they were going to Washington, D.C. because they were trying to protest. They wanted to protest the federal government into giving them their bonus early. Hey, they're veterans. They fought in the war. They did a lot for American freedom. They felt that they should be given that money. And there were a couple of senators who were on board. They actually brought it up to Congress, and they voted on it as to whether or not this money should be given out earlier, because it's going to do a lot of good. It's going to help a lot of people. But Congress, they turn it down. And after they turn it down, things didn't really get rowdy. A lot of people left, but the people who were staying realized that, hey, we're in this for the long haul. We are going to be here for quite some time. So that's when they start to set up Hoovervilles. That's when they start to set up in abandoned buildings. And President Hoover, he wasn't against the protest aspect of it, but he did not believe that they should be in abandoned buildings. So because of that, he sends in the police to, in a sense, kind of evict these individuals from these buildings. And while they are evicting individuals, 2 shots are fired. And because 2 shots are fired, the U.S. Army gets called in. And the U.S. Army also fires into the crowd of veterans. Now, you can kind of see on the image here on the bottom, you see the cavalry, you see the people who are kind of running and leaving. Now, this does not look good for the president. And again, I used the example before, but here are people who fought for America in World War I. And now they're here trying to get their bonus early, and shots go off during this peaceful protest. Not a good look for the president. And the second one was hunger marches. Now, really, the name implies really what it's all about. So marches, they're going to start in Oklahoma City. And it starts in Oklahoma City because that is an area where there are a lot of people who are impoverished. They are not having enough nutrition. They're not getting enough food each day. And hunger and joblessness, they reach an all-time high. So they wanted to show to President Hoover how tough their life was, which it's not like he didn't know what the life was like. He knew exactly how difficult it was to be living at this time. I mean, he himself had to live through it, but they wanted to show him that this is what life was like. So they go to D.C. again to protest. Now, originally, they're told, nope, you can't protest here, but Congress, they allow the petition. They allow the petition for the people who are hungry to protest, to have marches, and for that to take place in Washington, D.C. So here again, you have another protest taking place in the nation's capital. So again, here's President Hoover, who basically is waking up every morning, looking out his window, and he's seeing all these people who are poor, who are homeless, that are living in these Hoovervilles. And on top of that, he's hearing stories now that farmers, they're destroying their own crops. They're doing this for the basis of supply and demand. I know when I talk about supply and demand, I always use the example of it as a balance. So you think about it here. One side goes up, which I can't figure out where my other hand is. Here we go. So one side goes up, so this side goes down. Other side is going to start to go up. So if they bring supply down, demand goes up. Well, they make some money on it that way. So really all this boils down to is President Hoover, he is trying. He is trying his absolute best. But the people, they're just not on board. They blame him for this entire recession. They blame him for the start of the Great Depression. And it's going to take the next president, FDR, to come up with a new plan, a new goal, and a new deal for America.